We live in a world where celebrity is important. It's a celebrity culture. But what do we do when the celebrity culture creeps into the church? Celebrity culture on this slice of fresh bread. Welcome to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville, with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith. Well, thanks for clicking on Fresh Bread. Fresh Bread Podcast 80. Fresh Bread, we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. And today, hopefully you're starving for the truth. And we're going to talk about celebrity culture in the church and how we end up going in that direction all the time. We are kind of celebrity junkies. And I am Pastor Keith. He's Pastor Brandon. I'm not a celebrity. He's more of a celebrity than I am, Pastor Brandon. You are, but...
No, I'm not a celebrity.
We're both not real celebrities, but we do live in a celebrity culture, and we can see how it's sort of, I don't want to say drifted. It's more of a movement into the church. And my first question for you is, why do we seem to put pastors on pedestals and they become celebrities?
Well, I think it is human nature to want to have a hero and, somebody we can look up to. It's the Israel wanted a king, and
that's true. Saul.
There's they wanted somebody that, and they chose Saul, which he was tall and handsome, and
he fit the part.
He looked good. He fit the part, and they didn't choose the right type of king, and so people we definitely as humans want to put people on a pedestal and choose kings that look good and sound good, and so I think on the other side of that same coin is that you are always going to have men who position themselves in that position, to be a celebrity. They're gonna work on being polished. They're gonna figure out what the masses want, and there's men out there right now, without a doubt. There's men in the church that are trying to position themselves to be, the next John MacArthur, the next Sproul, and the next Spurgeon, that sort of thing. And so, and not that, and certainly not like trying to hit pot shots at those guys. Obviously they have or had celebrity status in the church, but I mean, it is a problem because of human nature, both on putting people on a pedestal and then also men wanting to be on a pedestal.
You think it's harder today because we have the internet and there's so many sermons that are available for people to listen to, and people, are drawn to really good speakers, and the way that, that we have all these Grace to You and we have ministries, but they edit their sermons and they have the music and everything's really dynamic, and these guys have such an ability to shape millions of hearts and minds. But the thing is that they don't have a real relationship with any of these people. How much does that hinder people growing in their faith? Or do you think they can grow from that?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously they can grow. I mean, I think that I'm thankful for ministries that have been, able to utilize social or media, whether it be social media or whether it be, the not mainstream, but historical media like radio, like television. There have been men who have been able to use those means to preach the message, and I'm thankful for those people. That it's funny because there's so many places that don't have a solid church or have very few solid churches, and being exposed to a ministry that is solid, I think is a very good thing. And so I think there's a reason why some of those ministries exist. On the other hand, there's the dark side of it, which is those ministries end up getting put on a pedestal, and they sort of overtake the local ministry, and they become more important in someone's life than the local ministry. And I think that's problematic because they're not known. I mean, someone who listens to a John MacArthur on the radio, John didn't fashion that sermon for that person. Mm-hmm. Like he, I'm not in John's study, but I know enough about him that he's not thinking of, Larry in his pickup truck driving down the road listening to this sermon. He's thinking of people in his own body and what they need. And he doesn't know Larry, and he's not able to shepherd Larry because Larry is, this is obviously a proverbial guy that we don't know who he is, but I mean, he's just an example
Yeah.
like that. But, there's millions of, hundreds of thousands of Larrys out there that are listening to these sermons, but they're not getting shepherded by a pastor, and they're not submitting themselves to a pastor. And I think it's even harder when many of these are not even going to churches. They're just listening to these guys on the radio, or they're listening to them on the internet, and they see that as church. They see that as, I'm actually a part of the body, and in reality, that's not being part of the body. That's basically being an absent participant, which really isn't a participant at all, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that it also hurts people kind of judge their pastors by listening to these guys, and these guys are so much better than these guys, right?
Yeah. I remember first coming here, and there was some folks that we came to, and I remember there seemed to be an expectation. I don't think I realized it until I was here for a while, but there seemed to be an expectation that I would be John MacArthur. I'd gone to the Master's Seminary, and they loved John MacArthur, and they'd listened to him for years. And when I preached, I wasn't John MacArthur. I wasn't John MacArthur in personality. I wasn't John MacArthur in being polished and having preached for 50 years, and even the knowledge and the depth that he had. And I had to get my own voice, and I was trying to find my own voice in the midst of all of that. And so, I think that there was some level of judgment that, oh, this isn't like I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be this. And it's interesting because they didn't, they hadn't really spent time, those folks that were involved in that, hadn't been at John MacArthur's church. I mean, the church that he pastors, Grace Community Church. And so, if you go there, you realize, oh, it's not what you hear on the radio. Not that it's bad; it's good. I mean, but it's not as polished and live every Sunday. And he does a lot of review, and sometimes it's kind of slow. And John is the kind of guy that ends up really setting up things toward the end. He then reveals, and so it can get slow at times. And he's a great preacher, obviously. I mean, I'm obviously not trying to critique John, but you don't realize that you're actually judging your pastor, the local pastor, against something that's been more polished. You mentioned editing and the music that goes with it, and you just get a short, like a 30-minute radio show. You just get a shorter snippet of it. You're not having to listen to the whole sermon and in one shot, which can be 55 minutes to an hour and 5. And I mean, it's just not fair in that sense. I mean, not that life is fair, but there is a tendency to judge the local pastor. And, and the thing about it is you don't know John either. And John doesn't know you for the most part. I mean, most of us don't have a personal relationship with him. And so, just as one example. And so, you get to know your pastor, and there's good and bad in that. I mean, if you get to know him, you're going to start noticing things about him, and you're going to, things that they're going to rub you wrong. And there's that relationship you have to work through. And you don't have that, you don't have that with John. John is always John on the radio. He's always the same guy preaching, and you don't know him, and you don't get to see the weaknesses and that sort of thing that you would if you were more up close.
Yeah, and it's almost like your pastor he may be a good preacher, he may be expositing the word in a great way, but he doesn't have his own radio broadcast, and so you're wondering, why doesn't he have a radio broadcast? Or does every pastor need a radio broadcast in their local area so that their church will grow? Like, that's another thing, right? The celebrity culture is that you want your church to grow, and if you have a celebrity, someone who's really good at preaching, and they're well known, then people are going to be drawn to that.
Yeah, and there's something good. I mean, obviously, I have a friend in Colorado that he's preaching, he's a faithful preacher, local guy, and over a local body that are preaching or pastoring a local body, not over them, pastoring that body, and the Lord has really he's been faithful. The Lord has been faithful to that church, and and he actually has a radio broadcast that they do local there in Colorado. And so and he's not a celebrity pastor. I mean, he's just a guy that's faithful, and he's a good preacher. He's a solid preacher. And, I think he has his own style, and the Lord has used it in his area, and the church grows because, people hear him and they want to come and be a part of it. And he's been able to, that's been a good thing. And there's nothing wrong inherently with that. I think that for me, what I see as the danger is really the conferences is really a big one. I don't have a problem with the guy that gets on the radio and is local there and people listen to him and that's a voice that they hear and I think can be a good thing. I mean, Martin Luther used the printing press, so it's good. It's not a bad thing to use media. I think that it's probably for me, it's the bigger problem. It's fine. I think it's good in a local area where a guy becomes known in that local area as a pastor who's faithful. That I can go to the Lord's church that he's pastoring. I can go there and I can listen to a faithful guy, and I can hear him on the radio, and I can see him on the internet. That whatever that is, I think that's fine, and I think it's good. It's positive. I think where it gets a little bit off track is that there's so much reach now, especially with the internet, social media, that sort of thing, that these pastors can be seen, far and wide, and they can build a following. And so then you have a situation like Steve Lawson, from last week, who has hundreds of thousands of followers and has built this ministry. And some people see him as more their pastor than their own local pastor. And so, and you end up kind of identifying with the guy. And so then when he falls, like when Steve Lawson has fallen now, it really affects a lot of people. Whereas, not that it's hopefully, your local guy, I mean, if he falls, obviously it's going to affect a lot of people as well, but it's more localized. And, hopefully another faithful guy can kind of come in and take that ministry and shepherd the people, and you can sort of, the church recovers and you move on. But it's more local. Like it's not a, you didn't hit the jugular, so to speak. And, I think with a guy like Lawson, obviously the church is going to survive. I mean, Christ promised to build his church, and Steve Lawson will not tear it down. I mean, so, or anyone else that sins, and that's not going to happen. But there is a sense that it hit the jugular a little bit, and that, we're really, there's a hemorrhage and we need to deal with it. And so, that's probably why we're having a conversation like this. Like, what, why is it so dangerous that a guy becomes so popular in that way? Why is it dangerous for their soul? And then why is it dangerous for the church? And I think that's why we're having this conversation. It's interesting. Last week, Carl Truman was talking about the celebrity culture and the issue with the celebrity culture. And there was a panel of like 5 people there, including him, and all of them were celebrity pastors. And he actually goes to a small church, and I think he said of 100, he said in that conversation. And so he actually goes to a small church, but he's still a celebrity in the Christian circles. And so it's just interesting that he was talking about the dangers of the celebrity culture, and yet, you could easily say he's a celebrity. Again, it's not so much that those mediums get used and that some people are more effective. It's just that it's a real danger. It's a danger for their soul because, you have success and you have all these people listening, and you end up, basically putting yourself on a pedestal, and then you have others that are putting you on a pedestal. That's the danger, and that's the problem with the celebrity culture. And it's gotten worse because it's interesting because can you name 10 faithful pastors out there?
I think you and I could, because we know of some from seminary.
Yes,
that are out there with small churches.
Yes, I think I could name 10. I may even be able to name 20. But the average person,
right? Would
they be able to name 10 faithful pastors other than the celebrities? And and that's actually the point. Is you really want to have an army of faithful men that are leading in obscurity and they're having, profound impact in their local area. And, it's interesting. I went over to Cedar Key yesterday where the hurricane is at, or hurricane damage was at. And I met a guy, pastor over there of the Baptist church there in Cedar Key. His name is Billy Dalton, and faithful guy. Seems like like-minded for the most part with us in terms of doctrinally. And so, but I really enjoyed watching, because he was there in the midst of the hurricane recovery, and they're using the church sort of as a hub. They're bringing in supplies and food and feeding volunteers and that sort of, and feeding the community out of the church. And they have a nice little auditorium, and they have a nice little area for fellowship hall, and all that's being used. And the church is high up, like on high ground, so they didn't have any damage, and almost no damage from wind or even from water. And so it's just the church is a light to the community, and he is a celebrity of sorts in the community, but he's just a faithful guy that's faithfully ministering within that small community. And so that's the kind of pastors that we need, is faithful guys that are just faithfully pastoring in a small community, and not looking to become the next big celebrity. They're not looking to become the next, MacArthur, the next Lawson, or the next Sproul, or whatever, name the celebrity. And so we just need an army of those guys that are faithfully pastoring that way.
Is it kind of impossible in our day and age to have pastors who are, let's say, they're really good expositors, and they're very personable, and their churches are growing. They grow, I don't want to say mega churches, but they become fairly large, for them not to become a celebrity pastor?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm not quite sure I know the answer to that. I think that the tendency is to put people on a pedestal, and the tendency is for even the most humble guy to kind of like the attention that they're getting, even, just because of our sinful nature and wanting the glory. And so, yeah, I think there is a tendency for that, and there's a tendency in terms of their own heart, and there's a tendency in terms of everybody else's heart that they would do that. And so, and not that that's bad. Like, it's not necessarily all bad for a guy to be sort of like the faithful dude that people look to. We all need a leader, right? We need leadership in the church, and there's going to be a tendency, as people lead, there's going to be a tendency to do that. And I think that it's just needs to be a constant fight in their own heart, and in the heart, really teaching the people not to put you on a pedestal, not to, don't see yourself that way. See yourself as a servant leader, see yourself as a fellow slave, and try to push that off as much as you can, and not try to be the guy. And if you feel that pride welling up in your heart, really take it to the Lord. But I think also having a good plurality of elders around you that are willing to speak the truth to you. And, even though you're a gifted guy, being willing to say, look, you're getting off base here. This is not good. And, what you've done here, or what you're doing here, you're wielding an influence that is ungodly. And, you may not intend it that way. You may think that you may not see it personally, but that's what's happening. And, so being willing to say those hard things to one another in that situation. And so not really trying our best not to put somebody on a pedestal that way, even though that is the tendency of the human heart.
Well, and the hard part is once you do that, let's say you have someone who's gifted in all these things, and they're very good at expositing the word, the church grows, and all of a sudden there is some kind of sin or something happens. Now, how do you remove that person? Because the church is kind of built around him.
Yes.
I was thinking, and I'm just using this as an example. I'm not saying this is Tim Tebow or anything, but let's say Tim Tebow lives in Gainesville. He comes to Grace Church, and right away we were like, oh, he's a celebrity. Let's put him up in the pulpit.
Sure.
Instead of me preaching, he preaches, you preach once in a while. And the church grows because of Tim Tebow. And then all of a sudden something happens, and not that he has, but I'm just saying, let's use this as an example. How do we take him out and not hurt the church?
Yeah, you wouldn't. And that's why you want to be careful not to push somebody,
Yeah.
especially if they're, I mean, obviously, well, they should, if they're qualified by 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, I mean, that has to be our, not celebrity status, not ability to preach, not ability to.
But is it a catch-22 because you want your church to grow?
Yes.
You want to have funds for ministry.
Yes.
This guy's going to do it.
Yes.
So, but you're right. You have to go by what it says biblically.
Yes.
And anyway, keep going. I didn't mean.
Well, no. I was almost done. You have to as men, you have to be willing to say, you may be very polished. You may be, you may look like the guy in many ways, but if the life doesn't match, 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, if the life doesn't match that, then they can't be in spiritual leadership. And especially, the more influential they become, the more problematic it becomes. Mm. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a problem. And that's why churches have to fight against that. But it's difficult because, like you say, a gifted preacher, a gifted teacher that draws people in, that's going to come with money, and that's going to come with influence, and the church grows in riches, the church grows in influence, and it's hard to say, yeah, I know there's some problems with your life, but we can kind of overlook that. And we've seen that. Driscoll up in Seattle was that way, and that church grew and became a powerful church from a financial standpoint, from a influence standpoint, and then you see Driscoll fall, and now that church doesn't even exist anymore. James McDonald's another example in Chicago, and the church grows and builds, and I'm not sure where the church is at this point, but I know Harvest doesn't exist anymore, the church planting arm of it, and at Acts 29, I think is still going with from Driscoll and that sort of thing. They still exist, but completely different than they were, and so. Yeah, I mean it's difficult because that success comes. I'm actually thankful. I'm actually thankful that we haven't had that kind of success. Like, like we've just kind of had to do the best we can, and there's been times that I preached to dozens, and not thousands, and certainly not hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and I'm thankful the Lord has humbled me in that way. And I'm thankful that that's where we are, because I don't want to go I don't want to have more success than I have character.
I was thinking of this the other day, how unfair. It's funny because I know the Lord is sovereign and he does things the way he's going to do them. But when you really think about life and the way our world is right now, we live in a world where there are people, literally rich people. And this is kind of gross to say this, but they buy children for sex. They spend $30-40 million. Then you have churches, these little churches who are faithful, preaching the word, and they're struggling financially to pay their pastor or anything else. But we can't look at it like that because we know that God is in control. There's a reason for that. Like I think you kind of alluded to it. If we were wealthy, if our church had a lot of money, I think we would not be as effective as we would be, because you tend to, when you have everything going well, you tend to sit back and just kind of relax and get lazy.
Yep.
But when you're constantly having to serve and you don't have the resources that you need, maybe you have to adapt to things and move this way and do that. But the main focus is the gospel. The main focus is Christ. You keep it that, whereas you can get caught up in all this other stuff. Yeah,
the big one for me, you bring up, for me, it's sports. Like you have a guy that can toss a baseball around or toss a football around or maybe runs fast and has a certain talent in playing golf or something like that, and they're making millions and millions of dollars, and like they're getting paid thousands of dollars every minute that they perform, and have churches that are struggling, and you have all this. It's the corporate money that's out there. All this money that's out there to be that people are making. It's crazy, and then you have the churches that are struggling. I'm actually thankful that we do struggle. I'm thankful we have a body that's faithful, and I'm certainly not saying that they're unfaithful in any way. We've been blessed beyond measure at our church in terms of how people have given, At the same time, we do have, it's not as if we have an excess. We don't have a surplus, and our budget is really, really simple. And the reason it's really, really simple is because we just don't have the money to do a lot of things that we would maybe want to do. And, and that's okay. I'm glad for that. But on the other hand, I think it is something that needs to be addressed where, a certain preacher that I heard a few months ago said they have more money than they know how to spend. They have more money than they have ministry. This pastor said, who, by the way, is a faithful guy. But then you have churches that are small churches that need funds. And so what I struggle with in that sense is that you have people who are listening to those ministries online or on the radio or whatever, and they're giving money to those ministries, but that money is being taken away from the local churches. And again, I want to go back because I know we have a lot of folks on our, that are listening to us. I'm not saying give how the Lord wants you to give. I mean, so if you feel drawn to give to a ministry that's more of a national ministry, praise the Lord. I'm thankful that you have the means and you want to give to the Lord, and I trust that they're going to use those funds in a way that's honoring. At the same time, I do think that there are situations where those funds would be better used locally to fund local ministry. And so I'm not speaking specifically of us necessarily. I'm just speaking in general, that if you're listening here and I would just say pray in terms of if you're giving to a national ministry, then you're not giving as much. That's taking away funds from a local ministry that's faithful. I would say you need to pray about that. And, because that local ministry hopefully would be able to use those funds in a way that, you have some influence over, and your prayers and your influence in the leaders' lives. Now, again, that can be, I'm not saying that, obviously people can get like money actually brings out obviously the difficulties and problems. And so, using money to influence people is not the right way to go. You need to give your money, with no strings attached. At the same time, there is a godly way to influence. And, if your heart is missions and you want to see missions done, influence your pastor by, by giving in that way and giving to them or not to them, but to the church so that they may use the funds in that way. That I just would say local first is better. Local first in terms of where you're spiritually growing, local first in terms of where you're giving. The local church is the way to go, and I think that's going to be the way forward. As we move on into where we're going, only the Lord knows what the culture is going to be like, what we're facing, in terms of persecution. I think it's going to get to the point where these small local ministries, in small influencing, in a small context, is going to be the way forward. And I guess what I mean is at the city level. Where, we're in Gainesville and we're influencing locally, and there's we grow in that way where we have an influence, with local officials and things like that. Schooling, you have, either having a school or being able to influence a school, for the gospel. I think that's the way forward as opposed to these big ministries that have, celebrity pastors and things like that. But.
So, yeah, I agree with that. And I think that was my point, as I was trying to say, is that, God has unlimited funds. But it's funny that we live in such a sinful world where so much money is spent on sin. The money that people throw away on things it just boggles my mind. But anyway, that's the sinful nature of man. So I just wanted to ask you this question. Do you think that the celebrity culture that we live in is built all on illusion?
Well, I think there is a certain amount of, if you're talking about the celebrity culture in terms of like secular, absolutely. It's all about what you look like, right? It's all about what you sound like. It's all about what you look like. It's all about what you kind of, stand for publicly. And there's a disconnect in terms of what's real and what's polished and put on the internet or polished and put on television or radio. That life doesn't match what real life doesn't match what is being presented, whether it be a sports figure or whether it be a music figure or movie star or whatever it is. whatever that celebrity. And now it's internet influencers where they polish then they set things up to look like they have this incredible life, and that they just set that up where people want to be like them, and it is an illusion. It isn't real life. And so if you're talking about it in the church, yeah, I mean, I think that there can be a tendency. I don't know celebrity pastors personally. I mean, I know I've been around John MacArthur a little bit. I know, was around Steve Lawson a little bit, as I mentioned earlier in the last podcast. So I'm not saying they live a double life, but I do know, guys like Joel Osteen, Robert Morris is a guy that fell a few months ago, a guy like that. Some of those guys, I'm pretty certain that they live there's an illusion there of who they are and public persona versus who they are and like who they really are. It's interesting that there was a story that was told to me about a musician who was a pretty popular musician in Christian circles, and he came to play at a church, and he got there and they didn't have the microphones that he wanted, and he threw a fit, like I'm not saying the name of who it was, but he threw a fit that he didn't have just the right microphones that he wanted, because he wanted those microphones because they made him sound better. And like, who's getting the glory for that? That's just one example, and I don't know the man's heart. I mean, he could have, that may have been a blind spot for him, and he's a guy that faithfully loves the Lord, but those things are problematic. I mean, in terms of, and that's problematic with the celebrity culture, because it makes you want to put your best foot forward, and it may be an ungodly way where you get the glory as opposed to the Lord getting the glory.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a world. I think the kids are into something called TikTok, and I think there's a bunch of people that become celebrities.
Yes.
For a week, maybe. I don't know. Maybe
some
longer.
of them are just short time, and they have some sort of that goes quote unquote viral, and yeah, they have a 10 minutes of fame. Some of them are have successful channels, and there's a whole world out there that you and I are not aware of. But we do have a tendency to gravitate toward that, and there is an illusion to that, and there is a human tendency to want to be on a pedestal, to want to be seen, and to want to be known, and by a lot of people. And as pastors, we have to fight that tendency. As elders who are around pastors who maybe have more giftedness in preaching and teaching or communicating or whatever, they have to we need to protect those pastors and try to keep them humble and hold them accountable, as that goes on, and not put them on a pedestal. But at the same time, realizing there is a giftedness, and at the same time realizing that giftedness, when used, is going to draw people in. And so there has to be some sort of balance there, tension, if you will, holding this in place, keeping people accountable, but at the same time, using that giftedness and realizing that giftedness sometimes is going to become more popular or draw people in.
So with the celebrity culture kind of creeping into the church, we have the celebrity pastors. Does that cause kind of a lack of connection with their sheep if they are a celebrity pastor?
Man, that's such a good question. I think that it can. It's interesting. I've been a guy, and this. My pattern when we go to church, my pattern is, obviously we do equipping hour 9 to 10, but I'm always out from 10 to 10:30, even 10:25 or 10:35, 10:40 after you're doing announcements. I'm out in the lobby foyer area, just spending time with people. Just like finding out how they're doing and connecting with them, and connecting with people maybe that I didn't see all week, or maybe somebody that sneaks in late and doesn't want to necessarily be hemmed in. Not that I hem them in, but at the same time, I want to talk to them. I want to get to know them better, and I want to see them become more part of the body. And I know some pastors, they want to spend time in their office, or they want to, I remember there was a pastor in California who was at a church in Bakersfield, and he would, like, as soon as the church was over, like, he would preach, and as soon as it was over, he'd go to his car. Like, he wouldn't spend time with people afterward, and just wasn't personable that way, and ended up getting ran off, and somebody else came in. That church is doing, flourishing at this point. But it is a tendency to be aloof, and especially if your heart is on becoming more popular, because there is a disconnect that the more popular I become, the more popular a person becomes, the more they can disconnect from real life and disconnect from their people, because the celebrity status kind of carries them, as opposed to, I need to really know these people. And, I answer to them to a certain degree. Ultimately, I answer to the Lord, no doubt. But in some ways I answer to them because I need to be a pastor. I need to be a guy that's serving them. And there's something tangible about that. And the more I put into becoming a celebrity, the more I'm going to hold myself aloof, because I don't want them to see the ways that I fail. I don't want them to see, the little tendencies that I have, the sinful things that I'd maybe do. I don't want to see all that. I want to be aloof from that. And it's a difficult situation. And I think that, going back to the Lawson situation, I think there was some of that. And, in hindsight, people, there was a tendency to hold oneself aloof.
That was a question I had with, not to pile on Steve Lawson, but is that how much interaction did he have with people at Trinity?
Yeah, I don't,
because he was always gone, and
yes,
and it was even when he was at Masters, it was hard for us to even get.
Yes.
He had coffee with you and I one time, I remember, but that was a rare time.
Yes, I mean, he just didn't see, it didn't seem to be that was important to him, and so that was, I mean, I think that's problematic in a pastor's life, whether it's this young man from Bakersfield who, he would leave, and as soon as it's over, he would go to his car. I wasn't there, so I want to be careful. That's just what I heard. I'm not repeating names, so at this point it doesn't matter. But it's just an example of things that I've heard in the past where there's an aloofness, and especially manifest itself as someone becomes more and more popular on a larger level, higher level.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap this up today, I have one more question for you. We're talking about the celebrity culture. We've always had the culture shifting. It changes. And we've also had church worship that has shifted and changed as well, because we've had people come and say, hey, how come we don't do things the way they did it in the first century church? Well, it's because the culture shifts, and the church worship has also shifted and changed. But can we still worship our Lord in the right way today with all of this celebrity culture? Do you think, even with the culture changing, are we still doing worship okay?
Well, yeah, I think there are definitely faithful churches that are doing what the Lord would have them do. Maybe it doesn't look like exactly what they did in the first century, but like you say, we're not in the first century, and that we're living in a 21st century context, and there's things that are expectations in the 21st century that maybe weren't an expectation in the first century, and that not all that's wrong. I mean, it's not like it's wrong to understand our culture, and to that understand that there are certain things that are an expectation of us that maybe isn't prescriptive but is descriptive of what the church is. And so, yeah, I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that's the bigger problem here. I mean, I think that but I think what is the bigger problem is when you start doing things to be popular. Like, we're gonna have a worship band, and we're gonna have the lights in a certain way, and we're gonna try to make sure that we have a certain sound, and we're gonna sing a certain number of songs, and it's gonna be more performance than it is worship or participating in worship as a whole body. Those things can become problematic. In and of themselves, maybe not so bad. I'm okay. I would be fine. I mean, I would be fine even if our worship style was different. I love what we do. I mean, I'm certainly not saying that we need to change anything, but But at the same time, if our heart is just to be popular and, to maybe shorten the sermon and, make it more of a TED Talk and, expand the worship and have certain lighting and, certain feel to it and, sing more songs that, less worship style and more performance style, those things are problematic and potentially shows a heart that wants to be more like a celebrity, more like what you would see at a concert, as opposed to what, a Sunday morning worship.
Yes, and like we were just talking about celebrity pastors, there can be celebrity worship leaders as well.
I know. I remember when we first started here. It's interesting because the harvest models, going back to harvest, the harvest model was they expected you to have a certain amount of money in the bank to plant a church, and they also expected you to have a worship leader. And it was kind of a church in a box. If you do it this way, you'll be successful. And part of that success was, having a certain amount of money in the bank to be able to get the church off the ground, but also, on the other hand, have a worship pastor that kind of gets it in terms of musically and is somebody that people would love to listen to, more of a performer as opposed to a worship leader. And that was the requirement for the, in terms of church planting. And so yeah, we can easily fall into those things. Even in, that was considered at the time. Obviously, there's been issues since then, but that was considered at the time pretty solid, like a solid church planting organization, and that was their expectation. And so,
church growth was probably their main focus, right?
It was kind of a church in a box, but it was, if you do it this way, we almost guarantee that you'll have success, and you'll be up to 200, 300, 400 people in a short time, and that was the focus. Like that, I think the Lord intended for the church to be really, like I say, an army of small churches with faithful pastors, and the guys that are willing to sacrifice and not necessarily be well known. And
the head of our church, Grace Bible Church Gainesville, is our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Absolutely,
it is not Pastor Brandon Phillips.
That's right, or Pastor Keith.
But that's why I'm here, is to keep you humble. So that's why the Lord brought me here, is just to kind of make fun of you a lot.
That's good. I'm glad you do that. I feel it makes me feel good. Makes me feel important.
But it is tempting to want to always lift up the pastor so people see you, because you have a gift, and I want people to see it. But you got to be careful. It's a tightrope, because I can lift you up so much where you start going, yeah, I'm pretty hot, pretty good stuff.
I know. I have a wife that's willing to tell me all the things that I do wrong.
Well, you are a faithful dude, but you don't pay pastors to be good, because I always say, why can't they be like me and be good for nothing? You've been listening to Fresh Bread, podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church Gainesville. For more information, go to gracegainesville.org. And thanks for listening.